Welcome back again to the Ivory Tower Collections. In today's video, we're going to do something that I probably should have done some time ago, but I just haven't gotten around to it. And that is that we are going to install a basic UAV board into this Atari 2600 Light Sixer console. Let's get to it. Now, the UAV board, as I have discussed in other videos in the past, stands for Ultimate Atari Video. And basically, it's a little PCB that can be used in a multitude of different Atari 8-bit consoles and even the 8-bit computer line to provide you with improved composite and a really good S-video output. And in this particular case, I'm going to go through the process that I use to install the UAV into a 2600 Light Sixer, or actually any 6-switch based 2600 console. Now, I will state up front that the install method that I use is not the more commonplace method, and in fact might consider to be a little bit more difficult. So I'm going to consider this to be somewhat of a more advanced UAV install method that I'm going to go through today. But the reason why I use this method is because it provides me with very consistent results, and it allows me to basically be able to purchase and use just a basic UAV board for any number of different consoles, and it doesn't have to be configured specifically for use with just the 2600. So let's get to it. What are some tools that we're probably going to need today? Well, for starters, I'm going to need wire cutters here. This is probably to, just to trim up and cut some of my work a little bit later. I'm going to need some good wire strippers. I am also going to need some small pliers of some sort. I can also, along those lines, use some small electrical tweezers. I've got a couple of different types here. I've got these here which have a little larger end on them. And then I have these which have a more sharper end on them. So I interchange between these two quite often. You're also going to need, of course, a good quality soldering iron, temperature controlled is best. You're also going to need some solder, of course, whatever type you happen to like to work with most. You might also keep some solder wick on hand, kind of handy to have just to clean up some work afterwards. Also, it's usable in cleaning up some vias. And then, of course, you're going to need wire. You're going to need sections of little bits of pieces of wire. Whatever colors, whatever lengths, whatever you want to use is entirely up to you and will depend on where you decide to mount the UAV, in addition to how far the wire runs need to be that you want to make. In my particular case, I'm going to be able to use most of these little shorter pieces of wire, and that'll become more clear a little bit later on. And then I would end up using longer pieces of wire, for instance something like this, to run for my output jacks. Obviously, of course, you're also going to need the UAV board. Can't get anywhere with that. And then again, whatever AV jacks you decide to use. So with that, let's get the 2600 torn down. The 2600 6-switch isn't too bad of a console to tear apart. It's actually pretty easy, and there's actually a lot of room on the inside as well, as you will see. So let me go ahead and turn this over. So you're going to need a number 2 Phillips. That's also another tool I didn't mention, but obviously we're going to need the number 2 Phillips here. And there is a total of 6 screws initially that we need to remove off the console. They're located here, 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 and here. And then there are 2 more in the very front lip edge up here as well. I'm going to go ahead and remove those 6. Now you will notice that there's 2 additional screws down here. We will be removing these, but not just yet. These are actually holding the main body housing that has the bulk of the guts for the 2600 inside. But again, I don't want to remove those just yet. So let me go ahead and turn the console back over. And at this point, I now have those screws out. So what you want to do is you want to be able to lift this top cover off. Now I find it as easiest to do this if you actually have all of the switches in the down position. Now obviously the select and the reset aren't going to be in the down position because they always naturally want to fold up. But I'll just show you how this works. So I'll start by lifting up the front like this, just to kind of work it loose. Then I'll start to pull up on the back side and get those initial switches off there. And there we go. It's popped off. So let me just set this off to the side. So this is the inside of a 6-switch Atari. We want to get the switchboard removed, and the way that we need to do that is we need to first remove this ribbon cable assembly up here, and just kind of, again, that just pops right off of that little connector. Tuck it out of the way. We need to get our number 2 Phillips again, and there are 2 more screws, smaller screws, hiding off to the side. One is near the RF modulator opening right there. The other one is located right here, just off to the side of where, again, off of the side of the main housing and over by where the voltage regulator section is. So let me just loosen these 2. And now the switchboard assembly will just come right off. So you can just set this off to the side somewhere because you won't need this for the installation. That takes us to the main housing at this point, the main guts. But you'll notice it's still stuck pretty firmly inside the console. That's because those other 2 screws on the bottom are holding this in place. It's easier, in my opinion, to get that top cover off and to get the switchboard off if you're not fighting the whole assembly trying to come loose. So I usually save this part for last. So at this point I'll go ahead and turn it back over again. And it's actually kind of resting on that assembly. So now I'll just loosen these 2 screws. And these are also a little bit different in length. They've also got some little washers on them. So again, you want to keep track of them. Don't want to lose those. Here we go. And the assembly just fell down a little bit. I just heard it plop. So there it is. So what we need to do now is get the bottom of this off. There are usually 6 more screws as well holding this on. So let me get this. And now that I've got all those removed, I can take this bottom plate off. I can just lift it right up and off of there. Okay, again, I'll set this off to the side. And here's the main board, but the main board is still held in place by, you guessed it, some more screws. They're right down here in the corners. So I'm going to get those out of here real quick. Now the main board should essentially lift up and out of here. What you're going to want to do is you're going to start from the side where the controller ports are, lift up on it just a little bit, and then kind of slide it towards you and out. And there's the rest of the housing. And there we are, the main 2600 main board. Here we're going to take a closer look at the UAV board in addition to the TIA chip on this Light 6er. And more specifically, I just want to go into more detail to discuss about which connection points from the TIA are going to be connected to the UAV board itself here. And keep in mind that all of these connections are going to be down the center vias here on the board. Not these outside pins, but the ones in the center that are closer together. They're also a little bit smaller. Let's start with pin number 2 off the TIA, located right here, and it will actually connect to the pad marked as S on the UAV board, right here. The next connection is going to be to pin 5, which is right here, and that's actually going to connect to the via marked with 2. The next one is going to be number 7. And that is going to actually connect to 3 down here. And then the next one is pin 8. And the connection from pin 8's TIA will actually connect all the way back over here to the pad or via for 1. And then the last one that we're concerned about is pin 9. This is our color signal. And that's actually going to connect to the section on the output vias marked as COL-N. Stands for color input. Okay, so now that we know which pins off the TIA need to connect to the UAV, the thing to do now is to actually build up our UAV. Now what I'm going to do in this particular case, I'm going to attach some of the initial wiring that's going to be necessary. I'm going to go ahead and solder those into place where I need to off the UAV just to get it ready to go, so that then the only thing I need to do is to solder the other ends to the points necessary on the main board. At this point, we are now ready to go ahead and begin actually mounting the UAV board where it will need to go and start wiring it up. I'm just going to mount the UAV board in this empty space here where an IC logic was going to initially be placed. And there we are. The UAV board is installed and wired up. At this point, I'm ready to go ahead and temporarily solder on some wire connections here off the output sides, just to verify that my wiring connections are good and in place. The only other change that I need to do after this, but this resistor here, marked as resistor 213, is a 680 ohm resistor that is used to improve color saturation that's attached between pins 6 and 9 on the TIA. But with a UAV board in place, it causes issues with the colors, and so you usually have to remove this resistor out of circuit. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and desolder just this leg of the resistor here, just to take it out of circuit, and then I'll apply a little bit of shrink tubing over it just to keep it isolated, and that way, if in the future everything wants to be restored back to the way it was, then that heat shrink tubing can be removed pretty easily and the resistor soldered back into place. And that's pretty much it. That's really all that's required in installing a UAV in a light or heavy sixer console in this fashion with point-to-point wiring. So the only thing left to do at this point is basically a last stage before we try to actually test anything is, what about the audio? Well, of course, as you may or may not know, the UAV does not provide anything for the audio side of things for the Atari consoles that you use it with. So because of this, you'll have to get audio from elsewhere off the board. But again, just like some of the other stuff, it's actually very easy to do. So if you weren't aware, pins 12 and 13 off of the TIA actually are tied together on the NTSC consoles. And that's because while there are two separate channels of audio that come from the TIA, they are combined together to a single trace that runs right along here to an edge of one resistor and then to an unused via next to a capacitor, this little ceramic disc capacitor right here. So there is yet another via that we can easily attach audio from. And there's really not much you need to do. If you wanted to, you could simply just run and solder a wire to that via, run it out to your RCA jacks, and you'll get audio. It will be a little hot in that it could be a little bit distorted at higher volumes, but it will work just fine for a majority of the people. Now, what I'm going to do is I am actually going to solder on a piece of wire to the via, and then on the other end of it, I'm actually going to solder in this combination I have with a 6.8K resistor and another 10 microfarad capacitor with another wire coming off of that to run back to my RCA jacks or whatever I'm going to use for audio. So again, this is kind of optional. It's just kind of a recommended thing, but not everybody's going to have extra little components on hand like this, and certainly the UAV doesn't come with these components. But this is stuff I happen to have on hand and can use. But again, if you don't want to, you can just attach the audio directly from that point and you'll get sound, no problem at all. So yeah, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to finish up this little combination set here and wire that into place, and then should be ready to finally test at that point to make sure it's working. Okay, I now have the Atari 2600 initially connected up with some temporary wiring here. I have composite video connected up over here, and I have S-video over here on the larger monitor. I also have the audio connected as well. So I'm going to use my plus cart here just to fire up and take a look at some things. We can see that, and yes, this monitor takes a little while for the S-video to initialize, but we can see that we have composite and S-video both working. And I'm just going to run through the color bar test really quick. So there's the initial color bar, and we can test if the audio is working. Audio is definitely working. And then we can go through the test patterns. There's our green, there's our red purity, blue, and then the various other linearity tests that exists. So everything appears to be good.